Got my meetup game shirt on, which can only mean one thing. It is time for 5-5 no limit Texas Hold'em, $500 max buy-in here at the Hollywood Park Casino in Los Angeles. Should be a fun one, you guys. We're gonna hop in there very shortly. As soon as I walk out of this lovely little private room to private table here. It's not really private, but secluded. We'll be jumping in there. Definitely gonna be more games today than there was yesterday. Yesterday we got 5 tables of the 5, 10, 20, which is an amazing turnout for that high stakes of a game. A little bit less pressure today, although anything can happen with that California variance. You know, we could see some big swings in either direction. So, without any further ado, what more is there to say? Poker time here at the HPC. All right, guys, word on the street is that you guys like to hear about poker hands, poker hand breakdowns, all that stuff. So I've been playing for a little over an hour, and I've already got several of such poker hands to share with you. So let's dive in. First interesting hand, it comes when I look down at pocket fours and call a $20 raise. We're going 4 ways to a flop, which comes Jack, Jack 3 rainbow. I'm on the button, and action checks over to the Cutoff, who puts out a small bet of $20. Definitely have to continue here, so I call and the other players fold. Turns a deuce, deuce of hearts, and this time action checks over to me. There's gonna be some decent amount of the time where I have the best hand, and there's gonna be a decent amount of time where I have the worst hand versus a similar middling type pair. I don't wanna just give a free card here to Overcard Holdings that took a stab on the flop. So I definitely wanna put out a bet, but it's gonna be a small one. I bet $40, and unfortunately my opponent calls. I do announce that I think he has something along the lines of pocket 6s or pocket 5s.
I think he's got pocket 6s.
So once the river card rolls off, he checks over to me. I'm just gonna check it back and take it to showdown. Maybe could turn this into a bluff. It doesn't seem like he'll ever have a jack here, but we have decent showdown value. So I show it down, and he shows us pocket 9s. I wonder what would have happened if I had turned my hand into a bluff there, but you know, as played, somewhat straightforward of a hand. In this next hand, we look down at a premium hand, pocket kings. In early position, I raise it to $20. We see 3 callers again, so another 4-way flop here, which does not come too favorable for these kings. It comes ace high. We check all the way over to the late position player who puts out a bet, I believe $40. Folds over to me, I'm gonna call and see another card, and the other players fold. Turn looks like a pretty good one for us. It's another ace, so that removes a lot of aces that he could have. Check it over to him again, but he doesn't stop betting. This time $65. I'm not done yet. He could be value betting a queen here. I'm gonna go ahead and call, see what happens on the river. River's an offsuit 10. I check, and he checks it back. So feeling pretty good. I show it down, and it is in fact the winner. Scooping this one in. Shortly after that, once again, we're looking down at pocket kings in early position. Raise it up to $20 and folds over to that same player from the last hand. He's on a short stack now. He jams his 90 remaining dollars into the middle. We have a straightforward call as it folds back over to us. All right, I call.
Got some kings.
I go ahead and show it down, and once again the flop does not come too favorable for these pocket kings. Another ace high flop, and this time it is in fact a bad one, as my opponent shows ace jack of hearts, and we cannot re-get there. So lose the pot here, but not too much damage again because he was on the short stack there. One more hand from this table, and definitely an interesting one. Action folds over to the HiJack, who comes in for a $20 raise. We look down at king queen offsuit, and I think this is a pretty good hand to put in our 3-bet bluffing range. I'm gonna go ahead and bump it up to $60. The big blind cold calls. The initial raiser folds. So we are going heads up here to a flop, which comes king high with 2 spades. Action checks over to me, and as per usual, as I've been doing lately, I can down bet here on a king low board. I bet $45, and my opponent pretty quickly jams all in for around $400. Kind of a sketchy situation here. We flop top pair, good kicker, but we lose to a lot of value hands here. You know, I don't know if he's gonna be cold calling with hands that would have flopped middle or bottom set here. He certainly could be cold calling pre-flop with ace king, probably not pocket kings. So there's some value hands in there, but again, maybe not a ton. As far as the rest of his range goes, that leaves lots of flush draws and stuff. So we 3-bet pre-flop, we flop top pair, good kicker, and we've already committed, you know, some chips. We don't want to just leave all those soldiers out there to die. We want them to come back with more friends. So I'm gonna call it off. We didn't come all the way out here to Los Angeles to fold top pair, queen kicker. So we're gonna get the money in here and see what happens. It turns out we are up against ace queen of spades, and we fade all of his outs. So off to a pretty good start here in this meetup game. Table number 1 is a good one for us. We are currently up about $500 here, and in the first hour. That's a good hourly rate, but definitely some run good on that table. We'll see what happens as more California variance is surely in our near future. All right, guys, looking at some hands here on table number 2, diving right in. So in California, at least in Los Angeles, they do this weird thing where the button has to move. It always has to be in front of a player at all times. There can never be a dead button. So sometimes that means that the button will like skip a seat into someone who is supposed to be the small blind. So then the small blind posts that $5 on the button on top of that. It's a really weird California thing. So anyway, I have the small blind in this hand on the button. And there's an early position raise to $20. There's 1 or 2 calls, and we have king 9 of hearts, and it's only another $15, and we're on the button. So we could definitely consider a 3-bet here, squeeze. We have a king, which blocks some good hands, but I don't know. We're getting incentivized a little bit to just flat call since it's cheaper. So that's what I do, and another player calls. So 4 ways to a flop that comes 9 high with 2 spades. It checks past the initial raiser into a middle position player who puts out about a $50. Pretty straightforward call here from our point of view. Top pair, good kicker, straightforward call. Everyone else folds. So we go heads up to a turn card. It's an offsuit 5, so straightens out the board a little bit, and this time my opponent checks. Lots of potential draws out there, and I feel like we have the best hand here a lot of the time. He could have some worse top pairs, such as 10-9, Jack-9, Queen-9. We could be behind, but I would expect him to bet a lot of his hands that are ahead. So I'm gonna go ahead and put in a value bet here, and I toss out a $100 chip, which my opponent, after thinking for a little while, makes the call. River's a pretty ugly looking card. It's an offsuit 6, so it puts 4 to a straight on the board. After she checks it over to me, I think we're just gonna take our showdown here. It's gonna be tough to get value from worse, so I think I make a pretty standard check back, and my opponent shows us pocket aces. Putting in the trap, I guess, the slow play pre-flop, looking for someone to squeeze, and by someone I mean, I guess me, since he actually said so out loud. Doesn't happen, but he wins a couple $100 off of us anyway. In this next hand, the under the gun player limps in, and we look down at 9-8 of diamonds, pretty suited connector there, so I go ahead and raise it up to $25. The player on my direct left makes the call. The big blind calls as well, so we're going 3 ways to a flop here, which comes Jack-4 deuce with the Jack of diamonds. Big blind checks, and we have lots of barreling opportunities with that Jack of diamonds on the board. Lots of cards that will either give us a straight draw or a flush draw, so I think pretty standard C-bet here. I bet $30. Player on my left folds, and the big blind makes the call. The turn does provide some backdoor opportunities. It's a 5 of diamonds. But what's interesting is that my opponent leads right out, this time for $75. I think if I had some stronger flush draws, I might consider a raise here, because that would mean that we would block some good top pair holdings. But with the 9-8, we don't have any blockers to anything. All we have is our raw flush draw equity here, I think. So I think I'd make a standard flat call here, and we are off to see a river card, which does not improve us. We have pretty much the nut low here, and my opponent assembles some sort of bet. I'm not even sure what it is, but we fold the hand. So, a couple other hands that whiffed. I think we had pocket 5s and did not connect, called a raise, and burned a little bit of money. So we basically are back to where we started the evening. Was up like 500 on the first table, down like 450 on the second table, so we're up like $50 at the moment. Someone bought me a beer though. This is a good beer. I like Blue Moon, so we got a free beer out of the deal. All right, guys, hopping into the next table here. It's a pretty fun one, although it did start off a little bit slow. We saw like 2 chops as soon as I got over there, but things got interesting not too long after that. In this hand, there is an early position limper before I look down at 10-8 of clubs on the button. Go ahead and raise it up to $25. Only that limper makes the call. So heads up to a flop which comes jack, deuce, deuce with 1 club. Dry flop, go ahead and down bet it to $20, especially because there's so many good cards. Again, lots of cards that we'll get to see their straight draw or a flush draw on the turn. So after my opponent makes the call, we're looking to find one of those cards to continue barreling on. And we do with the 9 of hearts, giving us an open-ended straight draw. He checks it over to me again, ramp it up a little bit, up to $70 this time, and my opponent folds. Take that one down with 10 high. Move on to the next hand where there's an early position raise to $20. Folds over to us in the big blind, looking down at king, jack of spades. Pretty standard defend. Make the call, heads up to a flop, which looks pretty good for our hand. It's queen, jack, 7 with 2 spades. Middle pair plus flush draw. I check it, my opponent bets $25. I think you can probably consider a raise here. I think that's certainly reasonable with all the equity that we have, but we already have showdown value. So I don't know if we need to put in a check raise. I don't know if we're bluffing or semi-bluffing or value betting in that instance. I decided on a flat call and we're off to a turn card, which is an offsuit 5. I check it and my opponent continues betting. This time he bets $65. Starting to get a little annoyed here with the lack of improvement, and now it looks like we might not have the best hand here. So I go ahead and make the call, and we're off to see a river card, which again does not improve our hand. It's an offsuit 8, so we check it over, and my opponent jams all in. So we had so much potential, and now we're just left with a second pair holding with a king kicker. And not only that, but we also block a lot of the hands that we would hope my opponent would have in order for us to call down. We would want him to have obviously like busted flush draw or busted straight draw. We block both of those, having 2 spades. We have a king in our hand, which blocks ace king as well as king 10, and we have the 2 spades, which blocks all the flush draws. So not looking like the best situation here with a pair of jacks. And not only that, but you guys tell me this. Does this look like a man who is just bluffing off stacks to you? I didn't think so either, so I went ahead and made the fold. But what's interesting is that even though he didn't show after I folded, he told me later what he had, and he actually had 9-6 of spades. So he backdoors into a straight, somehow makes the best hand here, even though we have him absolutely crushed on the flop. Of course, he didn't show, so we can't be 100% certain that's what he had, but oftentimes I feel like people are pretty honest here at these meetup games, and for him to actually say 6-9 of spades in particular, just makes me definitely lean towards believing him, and I'm quite certain that he is in fact telling the truth there. Anyway, just shortly after that, we move on, and there was some discussion of the Iron hand. If you don't know what that is, there's another player who plays in Los Angeles, goes by the name of Israeli Ron, and his favorite hand is the Queen Deuce. Suited or offsuit, doesn't matter. So there's some discussion happening at the table about the Queen Deuce in this hand when there's a straddle on it and an early position limp, and we look down at Queen Deuce. So just the timing of it all is just a little bit too serendipitous. We have to play it, we have to raise it, make it $45 to go. It doesn't get all the way through, the big blind makes the call and the limper folds. So we're going heads up to a flop here. It comes jack 9-8 with 2 spades. He checks it over to me, and even though we do have some equity here with the gutter ball, this flop is going to connect with my opponent's range, I think, so often. There's so many hands that he can continue with. So I don't know if I just want to start barreling away and betting away with the Queen Deuce and getting carried away. So I just decided to check it back and try to realize some equity here. And in fact, we do realize some equity with the 10 of spades immediately on the turn. He checks it over to me. I'm going to bet $30 here and then look to put in a more decent sized bet on the river. He does make the call, so we are off to see a river. However, it pairs the board. So now that there's 4 cards to a straight on board, 3 cards to a flush, and the board is paired, after he checks it over to me, I'm a little bit hesitant to put in a bet here. Not only because I think I might not have the best hand, but because he can put us in some tough spots with a check raise. Even though there's not a whole lot of river check raise bluffing going on in a typical 5-5 game, my opponent seems to know what he's doing, and again, I don't know how much value I can get from worse hands. So I'm just gonna not get too carried away, not put myself in a tough spot here with this hand. I'm gonna go ahead and take this one to showdown. I check it back, and my opponent shows us King Jack. I go ahead and show him the Queen Deuce. We get a good reaction out of my opponent and his neighbor.
Good enough. Just needed one.
His neighbor was the one who was just telling him the story about the queen deuce. So timing was perfect. That was a really fun hand, and we're gonna go ahead and take that one down. All right, moving on. Still playing, still bouncing around tables. It is 8:23 in the PM at the moment. Plenty more poker to be played for another 2.5 hours or so. Alright guys, we're jumping ahead a couple tables here because pretty much nothing happened on the previous table that I was at. I did have a delicious grilled salmon Thai. Awesome, it was on point. I can't remember the exact name, but I'm sure you'll find it on the menu. Anyway, first hand I get dealt into on the next table, looking down at King 10 of clubs from under the gun. Go ahead and raise it up to $20 and we see 3 callers. So a standard typical 4-way flop here in Los Angeles, which comes down 10-7-6 with 2 clubs. Pretty fantastic flop for our hand. Checks over to me, I bet $50. Folds back to the big blind who puts in a raise, min raise, up to $100. And it's kind of funny because just instantly I know that we are, can't say bad shape because we have the second up flush draw, but I just know right away that we are definitely behind when he makes that raise and the way he slides out his chips. Just a live read kind of thing. Anyway, definitely not folding. Obviously, we make the call. The turn puts 4 to a straight on the board, so it's an even worse situation, and he slides out $200. There would only be another like $100 behind that to play for after the 200. So I am just gonna go ahead and let this hand go. That looks so beautiful on the flop, but there's just virtually no way that we are in good shape here heading into the river, and not that much more money to play for if we do happen to make a flush. I make the fold, he lets us see 1 card, and it's a 9. Several players at the table say 8-9, and he gives an affirmative response that that is what he had, 8-9 of hearts. We don't get to see it, but again, you know, he has a 9 in there. Kind of unlikely that we ever have the best hand in that situation. Shortly after that, the straddle is back on, and we look down at pocket kings once again in early position. I raise it up to $30 before we see a 3-bet from the small blinds to either $105 or $110. It folds back to us, and considering that the max buy-in in this game is $500, and considering that there's a straddle on, we're basically short stacked in a you know, like a 5-10 game. When the straddle is on, we're playing 5-5-10, then we only have 50 big blinds, and I actually only had $450 in front of me, so that's even less. So I think it's a pretty standard jam in this spot. Just gonna go ahead and rip it in there and you know, maybe represent ace king, or maybe even worse sometimes, but just gonna go ahead and jam it in there. It's not too much more, and I think it's pretty standard. My opponent thinks for a little bit before letting it go. So we're gonna take this one down. We don't see any more further action. Obviously we wanna get called in that spot, but I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense to do anything other than jam there. In this hand, we look down at pocket 10s and go ahead and raise it up to $20 once again from early position. Only 1 caller this time, so a rare heads up flop here in Los Angeles. Flop comes down at king 5-4 with a flush draw. I'm gonna check it this time, and the middle position player bets $25. Can't give up pocket 10s for a single bet with only 1 overcard, so I make the call. The turn is an ace, which adds a second flush draw on the board. I check it over to him, and this time he checks back. River's an offsuit 3. I check it over to him again, hoping to get to showdown, but he has other ideas, and he bets $55 this time. So it's kind of an interesting spot because I wouldn't expect him to value bet a king on this river too often, and I also wouldn't expect him to check back with an ace all the time unless it's a very weak ace, maybe like an ace with a flush draw that has some decent showdown value and just wants to realize equity. So that's sort of an ace. I guess could maybe take that line, but there's not really that many hands. We don't have any diamonds in our hand, which would block the front door flush draw. So after looking back at my hand and basing my decision on that, and realizing that I don't have a diamond in my hand, I'm gonna shrug and toss in the call and see what we're up against, and it turns out that we're up against Jack 9 of diamonds. So that one works out for us. You know, a lot of the hero calls on this vlog have not worked out, but this one works out. I think I like my thought process there, and basing the decision on whether or not I have a diamond. In this next hand, I have the straddle on, and the under the gun player raises it up to $40 folds all the way over to us. We're looking down at ace 4 suited. I think it's good enough to defend, wheel ability, flush ability, and an ace. And it's my birthday hand, January 4th, 1-4. Gotta play the birthday hand. So I make the call, we're heads up to a flop, which comes ace high. Action checks through. The turn is a queen. I am going to bet small, maybe charge some various draws, gutter balls, maybe charge a queen, get some value. I bet $25 and he makes the call. The river is another 8. So now we are playing aces and 8s with a queen. So I think we can go for value here because if he happened to have ace king, I think it's very unlikely that he would check back on the flop and just flat call the $25 small down bet on the turn. So we're chopping with all the other aces, aside from ace queen, which I, again, would expect him to put more money in on earlier streets. We chop with other aces, and I think we can still try and get value from a queen, and he can put us on some busted draws as well. So I bet $65, scratch that, I bet $60, and my opponent thinks for a little while before making the call. I flip my hand over and he mucks his hand. So pretty happy with that one again, pretty happy with that decision to bet small on the turn and then continue to try and get some value there on the river. We did it, we got value in this hand and we got value from this guy playing red or black, like 6 hands in a row playing red or black. I won all of them. He didn't win a single one. $10 a hand, $10 a flop. This guy scoops $60, red or black. Sorry, buddy, that's some run bad, but you guys know I'm a luck box, so I don't know what you're doing. Betting against me in non-skill games, not a good idea. All right, guys, one more interesting hand here where the straddle is on once again. There's an early position raised to $35. The button slides out a 3-bet, $100. A slow slide out of the 1 stack 3-bet. And we look down at pocket queens in the small blind. So this is one of those spots that can come up somewhat frequently where there's a raise and a re-raise. And we have a pretty strong hand. Pocket queens is generally a premium, but facing a 3-bet on a table where there just aren't a lot of 3-bets happening, this is just the kind of situation where my opponent's range is going to be fairly nutted. That being said, it does kind of suck to flat call a 3-bet, cold call a 3-bet out of the small blind, have to play the rest of the hand out of position. So don't really like that option, don't really like 4-betting, obviously don't like folding. I guess you can kind of flip a coin between putting in the 4-bet and flatting. I decide on the flat call, although I generally really don't like that option. Just not a whole lot of good options there in this hand. So after I flat call, the initial raiser calls as well. So we're going 3 ways to a flop, which comes 10, 9, 3. We do flop ourselves an overpair here. So we check it, the initial raiser in early position checks, and the button checks it back. The turn is the 8 of hearts, which adds a flush draw and starts straightening this board a little bit. I don't want to give any more free cards here, but I am a little bit concerned about the player in early position because for him to overcall behind me, he could easily have a hand like pocket 10s, pocket 9s, or pocket 8s. Anyway, I'm going to try and get some value here and shard some hands, some overcard holdings and some straight draws, hand like pocket jacks as well. I bet $150 and both of my opponents call. So I feel pretty good at this point. There's some draws available, but we haven't seen too much action post-flop. I feel like I still have the best hand here, a decent percentage of the time. The river is a 6, an offsuit 6, which puts a one-liner to a straight on the board. I want to get to showdown here with these pocket queens. I'm not sure how much value I can get from worse, just with a 1-pair hand on a 4 to a straight board, so I check it. Early position player checks it. Late position player checks it. I show it down, and the early position player shows us 8, 9 of diamonds for a turn 2 pair. The player on the button had ace king of hearts, so he picked up the flush draw on the turn to go along with his 2 overcards. So it further illustrates why it would be a little bit more ideal to put in the 4-bet from the small blind, especially with the initial raiser behind me yet to act, because a lot of times he can either squeeze, and if he doesn't squeeze, he's getting a good price to continue and make the best hand. So if we had 4-bet, we would force him out and we would have won versus the ace king. Granted, I do think the range for the player on the button is going to be pretty snug there. I think he's going to have aces, kings, ace king, maybe jacks. I'm not sure if he would add jacks in there to his 3-bet range, but if he does, we definitely want to be 4-betting there with pocket queens. Maybe we want to be 4-betting anyway with this hand, and in hindsight, if we had got it in for $800, we would have won a big pot there versus the ace king. But that's hindsight. Something to think about for future sessions for sure. Pretty close spot either way. We're going to rack up the chips at this point. Not a whole lot went down. I played one more table after that, but not a whole lot went down. Did get a chance to play with Miss P's and Q's poker. She's got a poker blog. Maybe you guys want to check that one out. It's good stuff. We end up into this game for $800. I added $300 on top of the initial $500 buy-in. Cash out of the game for $705 plus like $714. We lose somewhere around 90 bucks. Lose less than $100. So we book a win across the 2 sessions. Last night we played the 5, 10, 20. We won 1.3K. Tonight we lose less than $100. So we win over $1,000 between the 2 sessions. Happy about that. Mostly happy with my play. Maybe a couple tweaks that I could have made here and there, but a fantastic turnout tonight at Hollywood Park Casino. At least 10 tables. I don't know what the total count was. Put it on the screen back here somewhere. Big shout out to Corey Silver, who is actually the tournament director, but is also our point of contact here at Hollywood Park Casino and has very much embraced the social media aspect of poker and has been the man here at Hollywood Park in terms of getting these meetup games together. Cheers, Corey. Cheers to all you guys who came out and joined us at the meetup games. We want to come back here to Los Angeles more often. More to come from LA and elsewhere.
Oh shit. Turn mic. I don't have one.
I just think there's at least got to be a third guy. Anybody else need another drink?
Hey, what is that, a genius? Cheers, man.
Cheers.